I do want to share a story though. I have a media type background also. When I was in the military, I did my job in the Navy and communications was dealing with the technology side of it and creating the networks to allow communication to happen. I love technology. I love working with technology. So I got a advanced degree in educational technology. And part of that process was I had to take a course on media. And the course that I took, and one of the things that we had to do was to create various types of media. So we had to take pictures and do some photography things. And I learned some things about photography throughout that course that have helped me understand how you tell a story. Because that's exactly what media is. Media is a tool that you use to tell a story. And the pictures that I took, I remember taking this one picture and it was this beautiful waterfall, and the image, I probably should have put it up here and put it on the screen up here to show you, but the image has the water coming over and just hitting on the rocks, and it was just a great image of seeing this water splash off the rocks as it came down over the waterfall. Well, whenever you span out and look at the full picture, it was actually just a little bitty stream that I found with some rocks that were underneath it. And literally the waterfall was about this wide, like 3-4 inches wide. But I was able to frame it in a way that it looked like it was an actual waterfall. And that's exactly what we do in selling. Whenever you come together and everything that you have, and you begin to present what your offer is, you're telling a story. And this lesson is going to show you how to frame that story. Selling is a creative process. So we're going to do a little experience and a little exercise real quick. I do want to give this quote, and I love this quote as far as creative selling. It is simply the process of generating a novel solution to your customer's problem. So remember a while back we talked about gaining focus and understanding why it's so important that your customer buys from you. This is where that comes back into play. Creative selling and the act of creativity is simply coming up with a new idea to a problem, a new solution to what that problem, to how to address that problem. A lot of people think creativity is something that they don't have and it's a struggle for them until you really just start breaking it down, and it's actually quite simple. It literally is just the process of coming up with a new idea, recognizing the problem, understanding what the problem is, how a solution benefits that problem, and then why that's important. And that's the steps of creativity as well. Recognizing a problem, coming up with a new solution to that problem, and then translating that solution so that other people can use that as a way to address a problem. So what was your process? Whenever you got the paper, and I mean, obviously you knew had to act something out. What was your process for trying to create your act?
The experience of what it was saying.
Okay.
Like that was homeowner association. So just the experience, okay, what do associations do? What are they looking at? Why are they there?
Okay. So something about the experience, so focusing on the experience. What else? What was the process that you went through?
Looking for resources to show what you're.
Okay. Looking for some resources.
Just drawing on the experience of having done it a million times.
Yeah. And looking back on previous experiences of how it's doing. We all go through this process whenever we come up against a problem. We face a problem. We all have a process that we go through to try and answer or correct that problem, to come up with a solution for that problem. Most of the time, we look at past experiences and we pay attention to how did I approach this problem before. But what about whenever that doesn't work? You have to come up with a different approach to it, right? What about this? How is this, just the process of coming up with this, similar to how you approach whenever you're presenting an offer or showing to a client. Why do you think it's important to have a strategy to go in whenever you're framing the offer? Because that's what we did. I mean, whenever you were up here, you developed a strategy for trying to express what you wanted to express on the paper. This process brings us full circle, and that's why I went through so much on the previous lessons on gaining focus and selling with focus, where you're going through asking the questions throughout that process that open your client up to revealing what the real problem is, what their situation is, how you can benefit that situation, and why it's important to them on how you're benefiting their situation. That's what we talked about, communication and the importance of asking questions throughout and getting clarification and inviting more information. What did you mean by what you're saying in that situation? How can you explain that a little bit further to me? Not making assumptions that you understand exactly what they're saying, but asking them to clarify it and provide more information as it comes, because that helps you open up even more of what their situation is. That's why it's important to understand those 5 motivators and why people buy, the drives, desires, needs, dreams and goals that people have, and the 5 emotional triggers on why people buy. Now we get to start framing it, and here's the interesting thing. Whenever you look at a frame, and I was talking about the picture that I did, one of the things that I learned, and if you look at good photography, I mean, there's even frames around photos here. What does a frame do? Okay, it holds the picture, it presents it. Do what?
It encases, like, to make you focus on it.
Okay, it encases and draws attention to something. Have you ever looked at a picture and you'll see, you see 2 pillars and then something off in the distance, right? The pillars are there to frame what's in the distance, and it allows you to focus not so much on necessarily what's right here, but what is further out. Same thing. So you can have a frame within a frame. It draws attention to an aspect of what you're trying to present, the story that you're trying to tell. The frame gives you the situation. And what you understand on the what, how, and why, right? So whenever you have a good understanding of selling with focus, and you have a good focus on what you're trying to frame, now we begin to flip it. And instead of gaining focus, you're trying to frame that focus for your client, and we reverse it. And we start with why. Why is this important for your client? We talked about the reasons people buy, and ultimately there are probably a few key reasons people buy, and one of them is, in some sense, freedom, right? They want freedom from something or freedom to something. They're trying to get free from what was previously so that they can have the freedom to get what's ahead of them, right? If you really break it down, it's some aspect of freedom. I want to be free to be able to do this or have this or get away from what I had. But if you look at your client's situation, you understand why is it important for them, then you can move into the how you're going to make it happen and what it takes to do it. So we end up reversing the focus to start framing it. There's a few things that you really want to look at whenever you're framing. And here's the first one is this. First of all, remember we talked about in why they buy is not what the product is, it's what it does, right? So the first aspect of it is you want to look at what the product or what the house is going to do for your client. Just lost my wording. Oh, here's the easy word. Experience. You want to frame the experience of what it's going to give. So here was an example that I was reading about, and it relates to houses, so it's a great example to share with you guys. The author was writing about this aspect of framing the experience, and the client really loved a specific type of tree, a cherry blossom tree. Well, whenever you go through the house or every window on the back of the house looked towards a cherry blossom tree that was in the middle of the backyard. So the salesperson framed that cherry blossom tree because that was a symbol of something for the client that was meaningful to him. So every time the client faced a problem, well, we don't really like this, he goes, yeah, I understand that. It's a little bit small, but look at the view of that cherry blossom tree. Then when they go into a different room, they're in the dining room. Well, the kitchen's a little too small, and it's not real great with that. But whenever you're washing dishes, look at that view of that cherry blossom tree that you have. So they can pick apart, and you can find a problem with every single property, every single thing that you're looking at. But if you focus it and frame why it's important, then that draws that attention. You want to frame the experience of what they're going to experience whenever they make it their own. The other thing with that is to frame the potential with it. And you talked about this last week when the client wants a pool. Here's the potential for the pool. So you have the experience and the potential, right? Every sale, again, you have the potential of what this is going to do for your client. The question is, how do you actually start doing this? So I'm going to break it down with a map to show you how to do it. And it's actually quite simple. And I left this space on the bottom of your page on purpose, right? So here's how it looks. Here's the aspect that you want to focus on, right? And we already know that you're focusing more on the why than anything else. So the experience or the potential that this has. You want to frame an aspect of the sale, not the entire thing. Less, and I wrote this down, less is more. As one of the tips at the bottom. Here's what happens. If you have too much information, there's no focus. There's nothing to frame in the offer. So what you want to do is you want to take an aspect, and do you guys know the 80-20 rule? %, of the people do 80% of the work, right? 20% of the salespeople make 80% of the money. If you look at it, that's how it's broke down, almost always. No matter what you look at, generally speaking, the 80-20 rule is that 20% produces 80% of the result in almost every circumstance. Right? You can actually break it down possibly even to 90-10, where 10%, which is why we talk about the top 10% or the top 1% of people, top 10% have 80% of the wealth, or top 20% have 80% of the wealth, right? That's just one of the rules. So if you are focusing on the 20% of the things that matter, not 100% of the things that matter, 20% of the things that matter, you're limiting the view so that you can actually frame the offer in a way that actually helps your client focus on that why. Some people actually recommend just focusing on the top 10%. So if you have a list of 100 things that are important to your customer on why they want to buy something, and you focus on the top 10 and you start paying attention to, because they'll say which ones are the most important to them in the conversation. It'll start revealing it to you. And you focus on that top 10 or 20% of it, you'll find the one thing that triggers them. And in the story that I told a little bit ago about the cherry blossom tree, that was that one thing. For that client, the cherry blossom tree is what solidified it, even though they didn't like everything about the house. A swimming pool could solidify it, or the potential for one for a customer. Or and you had one the other day that one of your closings, if I remember right, that they didn't like an aspect of the house, but they ended up getting it because they liked something else. Was that correct? I'm trying to remember. I thought that was something that came out. But here's the thing, is if you want to frame the fewer items that are important. Because whenever you start to frame this, it creates, they start thinking about it, right? So it creates thoughts on it. Here's what they focus on, right? This is focus. So you're framing the offer, you're framing an aspect of the sale, the top 20% or 10% of the sale that you're trying to help your client focus on, which creates that focus that you're drawing attention to, right? This leads to a belief. Right? There are, and I'll just put this symbol here, there are positive thoughts, there are negative thoughts. Both of these lead to a specific belief. And we talked about this whenever we did the sales word map. When we talked about how do you associate, what words do you associate with selling or sales. And we have positive words, negative words. And what we focus on begins to form a belief. Positive beliefs, by the way, if there's a positive focus and a negative focus, there's a positive and negative belief, right? Positive belief leads to faith. Negative belief leads to doubt. Faith leads to a feeling. If you break down the feelings enough, I mean, it could be happiness, joy, all of those things, but essentially, if you break it down in sales, faith creates anticipation. Doubt creates anxiety. And we talked about this a little bit in our first session. We were talking about gaining focus and selling with focus. And this is why people feel anxious when they go into a sales presentation. Faith is a belief that things are going to work out in my favor. Doubt is a belief that things are not going to work out in my favor. So here is the process that you want to focus on, and we'll get to the results of this in a minute. If you focus on the positive, it will lead to a belief of faith, which naturally leads to a feeling of anticipation. If you focus on the negative, it will lead to a belief of doubt, which then leads to anxiety. Anticipation leads to wanting to do something. It leads to action. Anxiety leads to inaction. So here's the cool thing. Focusing on the positive throughout, we already know, leads in this process faith to anticipation to action. But not everything's positive, right? And you can't just focus on positive alone because we have negative feedback. Negative feedback indicates that something's not right. Something's wrong. Which gives us the opportunity to then be creative and correct it and face another problem. That's what you're experiencing right now. Is we got some negative feedback that something's not entirely correct. However, there's a way to get around that. And here is, psychologically speaking, we need that negative feedback, but we have to remain focused on the positive results of that. Because here's what happens, and you can even do this with your clients whenever you're framing it and you're presenting the offer. If you focus and you're focusing on the positive, your customer sees something negative, what do? And this is one of the tools that I use to become more thankful, to become more aware of positivity in my life. And we started doing a thankful jar. We wrote down something that we were thankful for, 3 things every day that we were thankful for, and put it in a jar. Things like that, because then you can go back and you can see all of those positive things going on. Having at least 3.7, essentially 4, positive associations per negative, then you begin to focus more on positive aspects of things. They also took it down further, and they found out that if you have more than 11 positive to 1 negative, the result is you become stagnant, complacent, and there's no real growth with it.
So you just kind of sit there and become stagnant.
Yeah.
Wait, if you have 11,
Because it becomes, if you have 11 positive to 1 negative, which means you can be 2 positive.
Become content and comfortable in the situation.
Yep. And then there's no reason for growth. You become essentially delusional. And that's why, you hear gurus that talk about, oh, just be positive in everything. It's all positive, positive. No, you got to have the negative feedback. Because the negative feedback, like I said, indicates something is not right. Correct. There is something in education. I don't need to write it down necessarily. You can, if you want. It's called dynamic disequilibrium. Being off balance on purpose. And what happens is, if people are off balance a little bit, it creates a sense of discomfort, which pushes us to become better. That's where that the desire, we have the 5 motivators, the drives, which are for satisfaction, but desire is to become better, to improve. I have the desire to improve, and that's where that comes from. Being off balance, and you can do that whenever you're framing the offer, being off balance or throwing your client off balance a little bit can actually push the sale further. And here's what I mean by that. Whenever you are looking at and you have the positive focus and you're focusing and framing your offer on why and on these aspects of why it's important for them, then they're going to recognize all of those things. Then you throw in, especially if they're relaxed, if you have the relationship where they're relaxed, they're not in a stressful mindset or anything like that, then you can throw in a negative to reinforce the positives that are before. They have to be in a place where they can, because it has to be done with the framing of it reinforcing the positive aspects. So when you're going through and you're showing the house or you're looking at something, they see, okay, I don't like this. This is too small. It's not the right size. You're right, it is a little small. But that allows room for this over here. Because this is smaller, this is a little bit bigger. Did that help with that process though?
Yeah.
Because it literally just flips upside down the original process of gaining focus. And it flips it for them. There are, which leads us to this, there are 4 types of buyers. There's some on the fringe that you'll have, for instance, the people that are never happy with anything, right? They're few and far between. I mean, they're skeptical of everything. They're an anomaly, right? You'll have that. You'll also have some people that are incredibly indecisive and can't say yes to anything, which on the other end. So there's people that are not happy with anything, people that just can't say yes. They need to be pushed, essentially, into something. Those are anomalies. Generally speaking, you have 4 types of buyers. And that's why I gave you this box on there to write them in. The first one, and first of all, if you will, think of this as a graph, kind of, or not a graph, but, well, do this. On the left-hand side, write the word, and I'm going to go over here just so I can write it. Write the word assertiveness. So if you look at, and you have the box, it's broken into 4 quadrants. The upper 2 quadrants are more assertive than the bottom 2 quadrants. If you go across the bottom, you can write the words people-oriented. So the 2 on the left are less relational, I guess would be a better word here, than the 2 on the right. In the top left, write the word driver. This is a driver. I'm going to read off some examples of traits that drivers express. The first one is they're efficient. They're focused. They are direct, goal-oriented. I want it now. They are results-driven. They can come across as very rude because whenever you're talking to them, they're just telling you, okay, stop with all the other stuff, just give me the information now. That's a driver. Very short, to the point, let's get it done, move on. Right? They are highly assertive. And if you're not a driver, or this other one over here, if you don't have high assertion and you're a lower assertive person, they can become overwhelming and scary. Right? The less assertive and less people-oriented, if you go right below the drivers want the information, they just want it fast. Right? Below them, you have analytical buyers. That's right. See, you have the analytical buyers. Analytical buyers are the ones that ask questions for everything. So like the drivers, they are less relational and want results or want information, right? Here are some examples of analyticals. Oh, sorry, analyticals are the efficient, focused, goal-oriented, realistic, independent, they're determined, but they ask questions for everything. They want to know all of the information. And they become, if you're not information-oriented, they become really annoying, right? So if you are relational, highly relational, these people become annoying because you're like, okay, stop. I'm tired of answering all your questions, right? Drivers and the ones I put at that: candid, strong-willed, independent, decisive, practical, efficient, determined. Highly assertive, but also highly relational. Are the expressive buyers. These are the buyers who they have a lot of energy, but they want to have fun. They're going to tell you their story with a lot of energy, and they're going to give you a lot of information. They want to have fun, but they also, that's how they want to receive information. They want the presentation to be fun. If they get bored, they move on. Expressives are ambitious, enthusiastic, visionary, fun-loving, they're friendly. Some of the things that they don't like are undisciplined things, anything that's overwhelming, overbearing. They don't want anything that's going to waste their time either. But they want to have a lot more fun with it. The other people who are low assertive but highly relational are amiable buyers. These are the ones that they're all heart. They're highly emotional, and not in the sense of like crying over every little thing, although that can be part of it. But they're emotional in the sense that they want to express their emotions, and they experience that. And they are very low assertive typically, but they're very relational. They're the huggers, although expressives hug as well. These are the ones that whenever you're sitting there talking about something, they are highly in tune to the feeling of it. Some of their descriptions are they're team-oriented, they're loyal, supportive, respectful, agreeable, peaceful. Now, you fall into one of these categories as well. I, personally, am a driver with expressive traits. So you can have a combination of these, right? So whenever I come at things, one, I want things very quick. I want it done fast, but I also want to have fun. So it's a strange mix for some people because, especially whenever I look at my sales team or anything like that, when I'm doing training or when I'm working with them, I am very direct. Let's get it done. Tell me now. What do you have? What do you have? And then when things are relaxed or whatever, I'm out there having fun.
As we went through it, I was like, I think I'm a combination of all four.
And you can be.
Fast, I like to analyze it. I like to have fun. I like to be heartfelt.
Yeah. So here's the thing. When you're looking at trying to frame and what we were just talking about earlier, you have to target your information to the buyer. You have to meet your buyer wherever they are. If you do that and you recognize, okay, this person is obviously a driver, I'm going to give them the information, we're going to come in, look at this, and you've picked the 10 things that are most important that they have mentioned. Look, this has, these are the things that you mentioned that were on why you were interested. This is it, this, and this. Here we go. And you can ask them, do you want to do it? And they'll respond in that way. They're more ready to respond if you meet them where they're at. If it's an amiable person, that's when you slow down, you take time to focus on the feelings, to focus on the relationship, to focus on those sides of it. If it's an analytical person, you go through all the details. They're the ones that you can bring things out and you can say, do you have any questions about this part of it? And you invite their questions, they're going to open up. And they're going to start asking, but then they'll engage with it. I had this is back when I was banking and running a bank over in Del City, actually. And one of my customers came in. She was highly analytical. And as soon as she started asking some questions, I mean, you almost know instantly because they ask a question and then another question right after that, right? So it's just constant questioning. I had to slow myself down because I am not this. I am nowhere near this. So I had to slow myself down and not get annoyed. Because I had to remind myself, she's just trying to understand. She just wants to understand the situation, understand what everything's on. So I went through and slowed down and answered each question. If you meet your people where they're at, then you'll be able to frame it in a way that targets them. Right? I have 5 tips listed, and this is what we're going to close with. First one is this: less is more. Until you get to an analytical. And they open up all the questions. Then you just go into it and answer them and move on. But less is more. Because if they're overwhelmed with too much information, they can't make a decision. Because they don't have anything to focus on or frame. Right? Number 2, use positive labeling. Back it up with negative labeling appropriately. And that's where I mentioned, if you focus on the positive and then bring in a negative to reinforce the positive, then it actually helps move that forward. Restrict choices. You already know what they're looking for, what their situation is, how you're going to benefit it, and why that's important. Restrict your choices to why it's important on how you're going to fix their situation. Because if you're able to do that and sit down and talk with them and put all of that together for them, you're able to line up, here's some of what we're looking at. These are the things that fit with what you wanted and with why you are looking, right? And then provide a way to act. Most salespeople who aren't getting their sales, they're not providing an action at that point. They're not, which we'll talk about next week, they're not finishing it off and closing that sale. There has to be action. Which leads to this. Whenever you go out this week, your action is to be able to target, okay, what are my customers, where do they fall? And then how am I framing the situation to match them? And then that providing an action, a way to act, is, and you can do it by asking this question. And this is a great question to ask. On a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to purchase today? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to purchase? They'll tell you. Whatever number they provide, ask a follow-up question. Why wasn't the number you gave lower? Because what that's going to do is it will allow them to say what they're really focused on in that situation. Which then gives you the opportunity to either say, great, let's get it done, or go to that next step of framing again, right? So if they say, well, I'm at a 7. Okay, so why wasn't your 7 a little bit lower? What was holding that back? Well, because I like this, this, and this. They'll give you where their, I guess a better word or lack of a better word is objection is. They'll have any questions, and I'm going to talk about this next week when closing the sale. You can literally do this process that if you do it the steps that I gave you on that, you won't have objections. It's a bold statement, I know. But what happens is whenever you're going through that process, you're answering all of their questions, and objections come from fear or lack of information. That's the only reason that you have an objection. So if you're answering all of their questions, then you're setting it up for that next step. So, a little prequel for next week.
But it may not be my dominant.
Here's the other thing, and I'm not going to like go off into it necessarily, but it's part of who we are. Authenticity and being who you are. A lot of people think it's about being yourself. The problem is we have multiple selves.
And we also feed on the people we're around.
Correct. And so a lot of people, just be yourself, just be yourself. Okay, which one? Because at home I'm one way, because I have a whole different relationship at home. At work I have a whole different self because I have a whole different focus. Right? I can't be the same with my employees and with my sales team or anything else as I am with my daughters or with my spouse or whatever else. I mean, we are different in different settings, and we take on, because we have to interact and engage within that setting based on that setting. So that's why sometimes you could be more of an expressive personality in one setting versus being more of a driver or more analytical in other. And that's where that negative feedback comes in. That's why we have to be able to pay attention to that so that we can recognize something isn't right. And the reason something's not right, and we can take it back to the previous ones, there's a breakdown somewhere in either the communication, understanding the situation, or in where they're at with buying. And that's because we get it also. And if you think, when I was banking, people didn't want, because banking is sales, that's all it is, because you're getting people to sign up for something or put more money in or something like that. They don't want to be pushed into being sold. It's not a transaction, which is a great way to word it. They don't want to be pushed into a transaction. They want to be in that, it's about the relationship. And it may take a little bit longer. In fact, some people, it can take at least 4 different interactions before they get to a place where they're going to be even open to purchasing something. And then you have the process of going through the purchasing process, which in your guys' situation can be an extended time. But sometimes it can take 4 meetings before they even get to that place where they're going to be open to, and say, okay, this person I can connect with in a way that I'd buy from this person. And it's just a little bit of a process because it is a relational thing. We're in a relational business of selling. And in order to be able to do that, you have to build that relationship. They have to build that trust to be able to get it. Yeah. And it does take that time, and that's why it's so important to be able to just sit and remember, it's not about trying to convince someone of anything. It's about persuading them to make a decision they already want to make.
And just pull the trigger instead of.
Yep. And that's where that action comes in too. Because everything has to have some action. Do not leave any meeting without some kind of action. Whatever that action is. If it's scheduling the next appointment, let's do it right now. If it's giving them the time to, okay, I'm going to call you tonight, to touch base with you on the offer. That's that next step. type thing. So you always want to create an end. What's the next action that they have to do?
So like.
Right. And I have a great question to ask people. So, I mean, obviously you don't have to, or you don't have to say obviously, but you don't have to buy right now, right? And then that relieves everything. Because I'm not going to try and sell you something right now. I mean, you don't have to buy right now. And almost every time they'll say no. Except for the ones that are like, okay, no, yeah, we do have to, we'll have it. We'll have that. And you're like, okay, good, let's get it done and move on. But most people, they're, no, I don't have to buy right now.
Most people seem to be.
And that-
If the right one popped up, I'd do it, but if not, it's not.
Right. And that relieves a lot of that pressure because then, and whenever they say no, you're like, okay, great. Because my job is just to help you go through that process. And that's why I asked the question. You mind if I follow up with you in this time frame? They'll say something, and that's my favorite thing to do if it's not getting finalized at that point. Look, do you mind if I follow up with you next week? I'll just touch base with you Monday next week. Just see where you're at. And most people are like, no, I don't mind. And then you just schedule it out and follow up, move on.